Hello, welcome to Kitchen Pedagogy. In this video, I want to talk about 5 key barriers to learning that provide a sort of mental checklist for thinking about your lesson in advance, but also as it's progressing, reasons why some of the children might not be learning it, even though others are. And each one of these is something you could write a lot about or think a lot about, but I'm just going to run through them all, and then it's a useful thing to stop and maybe reflect on one by one. So the first thing is attention. It's the obvious bottleneck into any learning process. Attention. Without attention, you can't be thinking because you're thinking about other things not relevant to the material in hand. And you can't really learn anything unless you're intentional in that process. I think that's a good way to think of it. You can't just be haphazardly drifting away in your mind, thinking about all sorts of stuff, and then somehow learn the material that is being presented to you or that's in the book. You have to focus your attention on that learning. So the first thing to consider in any learning process is, do you have the student's attention? And of course, as with all these things, it's all the student's attention. Now, you can't just hope they're paying attention. You can't just say, are you all paying attention? And then they go, yeah. You've got to give them things to do so that their mind is full of the thing you need them to do. And then they have to show you that they're doing it as a kind of accountability thing. So, for example, getting everybody to write a sentence now on your whiteboard, show me. They have to do that. They have to think about that. And the task of doing that sort of pushes out everything that might be distracting them, so that they have to do it now. And because you can check every single student's whiteboard, they all have to think. And it's that type of structure. Unless they all have to be doing something on their own, they might not be thinking about the material. And that relates to other things like collaborative learning tasks, even pairs, where as soon as you've introduced another person, there's this danger of offloading the thinking to others, which means you're not having to do the thinking. And you've got to be very, very disciplined about things like paired talk, and certainly any groups bigger than 2, so that everyone has to produce an outcome, or certainly be expected to produce an outcome, so that they have to do the thinking and be involved. So that's really, really important. And attention deficits, can often be mischaracterized as sort of faults of children because of their demeanor. But actually, it's better to think of it as just a human characteristic. Every single person risks mind wandering. Adults do it all the time. So we have to construct the lessons assuming that unless we involve everybody systematically all the time, they probably will be drifting away. And it's a much healthier mindset to have as a teacher, to think losing your attention isn't a terrible discipline thing. It's just inevitable. So come on everyone, let's be back in here. I need you all doing this, and good classroom routines will focus on attention. So that's the first thing. Is everybody thinking? Is everybody focusing their attention? And how do I know? Another thing is to do with memory overload. So transient information. The more you say verbally, the more information you present at once, the longer you go into your storytelling, your narratives, your explanatory talk, the more likely it is that that is starting to be overloading. The more information that you see visually at one time can be overloading. So we need to think hard about paring things down to small elements, a few things at a time, and then checking for understanding. So a bit of a story and then a check, a bit of an explanation and then a check. Because then we're making sure that what we hope is going across is actually landing. It's so easy to fall into this trap of thinking, oh, another quick thing, another quick sentence, another quick reminder will be a benefit. But actually, for a lot of children, that's just noise, and you're not getting through. So being really conscious of memory overload and punchy, short steps, check, a bit more, check. That's the rhythm to get into with lessons. And it's not saying teachers shouldn't do a lot of talking. It's just that they should do as much talking as they need, punctuated with checks for understanding, so that we don't risk a lot of it just being wasted on the children who find learning the hardest. This links to prior knowledge. It's much harder to follow explanations if you don't know a lot of the stuff that's being said. So your prior knowledge is a really important thing. So when you're asking a question or setting a scenario, it could be a physical experience you're assuming, some words you're expecting. Just check, has everyone heard of this? Has everyone seen this? And of course you don't do that by saying those things. You don't just say, has everybody seen this? You kind of get them to talk about it and maybe describe it and revisit a couple of earlier problems that should be familiar, and then we know we're ready to move on. Using mini whiteboards and so on to just say, can everyone remind me of this? Boom, 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 and everyone shows you. So you're finding out, is anyone really not sure of these key words that we're about to use in this discussion? Because unless you know the words, you won't be able to participate. Just go as deep as you need. Think of the weakest child in the class. Make sure they can follow what you're saying. Simple things like you're talking about a place, a country. Where is it? Show them. Don't just say, oh, it's next to so-and-so. Show them. Make it concrete. Make it explicit. And give lots of different examples, and then their knowledge will be cued. The fourth one is fluency. So sometimes you have this thing where the teacher, it could be you, says all the words that you might be describing. I often use this in my training, the example of describing the respiratory system. And you might be the one that's saying nasal cavity, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli, diaphragm. You might be the one using all those words. The deoxygenated blood flows in and then it becomes oxygenated. You're saying those terms, but the children may never say them. And they're not therefore developing the capacity to use the words unless you structure lessons so that they have to explain things using the words, simply tell the story of oxygen flowing through the system, using the terminology. So unless you set up tasks which require all the students to use the words, they're not going to use the words, and that's then harder for them to feel confident using them later. So simple things like everyone in your pair talk through the explanation, taken in turns. So systematically, every single child is developing some fluency, some building it up over time. That's the sort of thing. And of course that requires some repetition. So fluency means doing things repeatedly. So never worry about having large parts of lessons which are consolidating the lesson before. A large part of each lesson should be building slowly on what you did last time, and do it again, do it again, do it again, revisit, revisit, revisit. That's how learning takes shape. Lots of consolidation and practice for every single student. And the last thing is the old chestnut of task completion being a poor proxy for learning. It's very common for teachers to think, what I need to do to end this teaching episode is to get something down in students' books. That's like the most important thing. But sometimes that's such an imperative that the thinking and the learning is bypassed. Literally, I've explained it, there's the diagram, copy it down in your book, maybe with some very simple fill in the gaps, which is kind of trivial because the students can see it and copy it. And you end up with a table of information, a diagram, a flow chart, lots of ideas that were shared around the room, none of them which were yours. And it's not really learning because you don't think to produce those things very hard. You just can just transfer from one place to another. You're not even having to summarize it, which does require thinking. So be careful about that. Are you just literally creating copied information in books? Or when you look at a student's book, does it represent their thinking and therefore some of their learning? And if that's not the case, you have to redesign the tasks so that the books are about learning, not just about recreating what could just be a textbook resource you gave them anyway. So there you go. Those are 5 things to think about. I'll just run through them again. Attention deficits, memory overload and transience, checking for prior knowledge, fluency or lack of fluency in practice, and finally that thing of task completion. There you go. Evaluate your lessons with those 5 things and then try to adapt accordingly, and it makes a big difference.